Next, I'm going to be showing a module that I wrote that draws syntax trees. For my previous degree, I studied linguistics, or that was one of the things I studied, and I took a class called syntax, and we learned about X-bar theory. Very interesting stuff. And I used DCG to kind of write grammar rules for Prolog, so that way it would know how to generate grammatically correct sentences. I gave it a very small lexicon with information about which prepositions, for instance, are compatible with which verbs. Although I do need to kind of flesh that out a little bit more and make it a little bit more robust. It's pretty much just proof of concept at this point. It could definitely be refined and expanded more. I also kind of combined and expanded a few modules from the standard library to generate certain numbers of random solutions in distinct sets. I think it's very useful, and I use that a lot in these examples that you'll see. So we'll take a look. So here we're going to generate 5 distinct sentences, and then we're going to print them out to this console. We're going to just generate another 5 distinct sentences, and you can see that none of these sentences are repeated because it's using non-backtracking sets or my modified version of them to keep track of solutions that it's tried. As you can see, these all start with John because it's very methodical in the way that it explores the alternatives. And the punctuation is just randomly picked. It doesn't mean anything. Okay. You can also specify certain words or phrases that you want to include in the sentence. So here we're saying that we want hotel and bathtub to be somewhere in the sentence, not necessarily in that order. And we're also going to diagram the sentence, so you're going to see that for the first time. So here's the structure that is represented. This sentence happens to pretty much only have one way that you can structurally interpret it, but some sentences actually have more than one. But this over here is the tree that corresponds to this structure. So. And any sentence that it can generate, it can also diagram. So that's a pretty neat thing. So here we're specifying that we want John and triumphantly to be next to each other as a phrase. That's why they're kind of like in the same little list here. And then message has to be somewhere in there. So John and triumphantly are indeed next to each other, and message is also in the sentence. So let's see if we can get one. So here we go. So now John is the subject of the sentence instead of the object. But John and triumphantly are still next to each other in that order. This message to John triumphantly surrenders. So now John and triumphantly are still next to each other. Yes, the small message returns John triumphantly. Okay. Beautiful. We can also restrict to a certain minimum and maximum length. I mean, pretty basic stuff, right? And you can, so here we're restricting to a length between 10 and 12, and we want bathtub in the to be consecutively next to each other, and then telescope has to be somewhere in the sentence as well. A bathtub and a telescope, and impressively small messages, surrenders, ... And you can see that is diagrammed here. Many sentences. And you can see that these are all within the required length. Okay, so generating ambiguous sentences, 2 or more possible syntax trees So these are sentences that are structurally ambiguous, depending on how you interpret them. So here, as an example, so here we're specifying that we want distinct sentences or distinct structures of distinct sentences, so we don't want any repeats because that's boring. And we're requiring the length of the list of structures that go with that sentence to be longer than one. And then we want to diagram all of them. So let's see. John sends messages in John. Okay, so maybe here. Let's see if we can get a better example that makes more sense. Here we go. Okay. So John sends messages in telescopes. Actually, the bathtubs is probably better, but okay, telescopes. So in the left tree, John sends messages, and he's sending the messages inside of telescopes. So he's like putting them inside of telescopes and then sending them in the telescopes. And then here, John is sending messages that are inside telescopes. So he's not using the telescopes to send them. He's like, the messages just happen to be inside telescopes, and he's sending the messages. So here, John sends messages to John. John is sending, he's sending messages, and he's sending them to John. Okay, John sends messages to John. So the messages are to John. The messages are the messages are written to John, let's say, and then John is sending them. We don't know where he's sending them, but he's sending them somewhere, and the messages are written to John. Yes. Now here is a sentence. It says some, but there's only one. Here is a sentence with 3 possible interpretations. John sees a man with a telescope in the bathtub. So this left one right here, so John is in the bathtub, and he's seeing a man with a telescope. So the man has a telescope, and John, who is in the bathtub, is seeing him. And this one in the middle is, so John sees a man with a telescope in the bathtub. The telescope is in a bathtub. And John is using this telescope that is in a bathtub to see a man. So he's seeing the man through the telescope that is in the bathtub. The last sentence on the right, John sees a man with a telescope in the bathtub, and so there's a telescope in a bathtub, and then there's a man that has this telescope. We don't know if the man's in the bathtub, but he has the telescope, and the telescope is in the bathtub. And John is seeing all of that. So it's the same sentence, but 3 different syntax trees, depending on how you interpret the sentence. Interesting stuff. Okay, now I guess there's 2 sentences. Okay, John sees a boy in the bathtub with a telescope. You can see it's kind of like flipped. So John is using a telescope to see a boy in the bathtub. John is there's a bathtub that has a telescope. It's equipped with a telescope. It's one of its features. And John is inside of this bathtub. And he is seeing the boy while he's in the bathtub. Not the boy. John is in the bathtub. The boy could be in the bathtub. We don't know, but we know for sure that John is in the bathtub. So, while he's seeing the boy, and the one on the right. So now the same bathtub. The bathtub is equipped with a telescope, and there's a boy in that bathtub, and John is seeing all of that.